I was leaving a late-night business meeting, the kind that left me exhausted but satisfied. Success had become second nature to me. Meetings in glass skyscrapers, luxury cars waiting at the curb, and the kind of power that made the world listen when I spoke. Yet, that night, something happened that reminded me how fragile life could be. As I stepped out of the building, the cold wind bit at my face. Snowflakes drifted down, covering the streets of New York in a thin, glistening layer. I pulled my coat tighter around me, heading toward my black Mercedes when I saw her. At first, she was just another shadow in the city. A woman huddled on the pavement, wrapped in a tattered coat. A small cardboard sign lay in front of her. "Please help. I have nothing left." But then, as I passed her, something made me stop. Something in the way she held herself, the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. My heart slammed against my ribs. It couldn't be. I crouched down, barely breathing. "Isla." The woman flinched at my voice, but didn't look up. My mind raced. It had been over 10 years since I last saw her. 10 years since I had let her go. No, since I had lost her. I reached out, my hand hovering just above her arm. "Isla, it's me, Damien." Slowly, she lifted her head. And then, I saw them. Her eyes, once bright and full of fire, now dull with exhaustion and pain. Recognition flickered. But instead of joy, a look of pure shame crossed her face. She turned away. "Go, Damien." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please just go." But I couldn't. That moment, the world around us faded. It didn't matter that I was a man with everything, and she was a woman with nothing. It didn't matter how much time had passed or how much had changed, because in that instant, all I saw was the woman I had once loved. The woman I had never stopped loving, sitting on a frozen sidewalk, lost and alone. And I knew. I wasn't walking away. Not this time. Isla turned her face away, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. The wind howled between the buildings, and I could see the slight tremble in her hands. She didn't want me to see her like this, but I already had. "Isla, what happened?" I asked gently. My voice barely made it over the noise of the city, but she heard me. She let out a small, bitter laugh. "Life happened, Damien." I opened my mouth to ask more, but then I saw something that made my breath catch. A small figure was curled up beside her, wrapped in an oversized coat. A child. My pulse roared in my ears. Isla had a child? And then, as if sensing my gaze, the little girl stirred. She peeked up from the folds of the coat, her big brown eyes locking onto mine. My heart stopped. She looked just like Isla. I stared at her, then back at Isla. A million questions flooded my mind, but I forced them down. Right now, none of that mattered. "You can't stay out here," I said firmly. "Come with me." Isla shook her head instantly. "No, Damien. You don't understand. I can't." "Why not?" She hesitated, chewing her lip, her eyes darting around as if someone might be watching. And then, she whispered something that sent a chill through me. "Because they're looking for me." I froze. "Who?" Isla didn't answer. Instead, she clutched the child closer to her chest, her body tense. I glanced around the street. It was late, and most of the pedestrians were too lost in their own lives to pay attention to us. But suddenly, I had the overwhelming sense that she was right. Someone was watching. "Isla, please," I said, lowering my voice. "Come with me. Just for tonight. You and your daughter." She hesitated. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse again. But then, the little girl nestled closer to her, letting out a small whimper from the cold. Isla looked down at her, pain flashing in her tired eyes. She exhaled shakily and nodded. "Okay." I didn't waste another second. I took off my coat and draped it around her before gently helping her to her feet. The little girl, her daughter, looked up at me curiously but didn't say a word as Isla lifted her into her arms. We walked toward my car in silence. But inside, my mind was racing. Who was Isla running from? And why did I get the feeling that taking her with me was about to change my life forever? The car ride was silent. Isla sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. The little girl, Her daughter was curled up in her lap, fast asleep. I had so many questions, but I knew pushing too hard might scare her off. So, instead, I focused on driving. After a few minutes, Isla finally spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped," she murmured. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "And you shouldn't be living on the streets." She let out a soft, tired laugh. "You say that like I had a choice." I glanced at her, but she didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she stroked the little girl's hair absent-mindedly, her expression distant. "Isla," I said carefully, "who are you running from?" She stiffened. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said, "My husband." The words sent an immediate chill through me. I forced myself to stay calm, but my fingers clenched around the wheel. "Husband?" She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the window. He wasn't who I thought he was. When I met him, he was kind, charming, but it was all a lie. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. "Did he hurt you?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. A sharp rage burned through me, but I swallowed it down. Right now, anger wouldn't help her. "Is he looking for you?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes. And if he finds me—" She trailed off, her arms instinctively tightening around her daughter. I exhaled, trying to steady my thoughts. I had built my entire life on control, controlling my business, my success, my world. But nothing about this situation felt controlled. It felt dangerous. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was thinner than I remembered, her once vibrant eyes dulled by exhaustion. The woman I had loved so fiercely all those years ago was now a shadow of herself. But she was still Isla, and I wasn't about to let anyone hurt her again. "We'll figure this out," I said firmly. "You're safe now." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "Damien, you don't understand. He's powerful. He has connections. If he finds out I'm with you, then he'll regret it." She turned to me, startled by the sharpness in my tone. I meant every word. No one was going to take her away from me again. And if her husband came looking, well, he was about to learn that I wasn't the kind of man to back down. We pulled up to my penthouse in the heart of the city. The moment I stepped out of the car, I moved to help Isla, but she hesitated, glancing around nervously. "It's okay," I said softly. "You're safe here." She swallowed hard before stepping out, carefully cradling her daughter. Inside, the warmth of my home wrapped around us, a stark contrast to the freezing streets we had left behind. The grand space, floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek furniture, marble floors, looked like another world compared to what Isla had been living through. She shifted uncomfortably. This is where you live?" I nodded. "For now. I move around a lot." Her daughter, still half asleep, stirred in her arms. I motioned toward the plush couch. "You can put her down there." Isla hesitated, then finally laid the little girl onto the soft cushions. She tucked my coat around her daughter's small body, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The tenderness in the gesture made my chest ache. "She's beautiful," I said quietly. Isla turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Her name is Lily." Lily. I let the name settle in my mind. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but instead, I simply said, "She looks like you." A ghost of a smile flickered across Isla's lips before vanishing. I grabbed a warm blanket from the closet and draped it over her shoulders. "Come sit," I urged. "You must be exhausted." She nodded and sat on the couch beside Lily, gripping the blanket tightly around herself. I sat across from her, leaning forward, elbows resting on my knees. "Tell me everything." She shivered. Whether from cold or fear, I wasn't sure. "It's a long story. I'm not going anywhere." Isla exhaled shakily. "I met him a few years after we lost touch. At first, he was perfect, kind, generous. I thought I had finally found someone who would take care of me. But after we got married, everything changed." Her fingers curled into the fabric of the blanket. "He was controlling, angry, and then he started hurting me." A sharp, burning rage spread through my veins. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "Why didn't you leave?" She let out a humorless laugh. Because he made sure I had nowhere to go. No money, no friends. He cut me off from the world. And when I got pregnant with Lily, I knew I had to escape before it was too late. I could see the weight of her memories pressing down on her. How did you get away? I asked. She hesitated. I had to do something. Something I'm not proud of. A dark suspicion crept into my mind. Is he still looking for you? Her eyes met mine, filled with something close to terror. Yes, she whispered. A cold realization settled over me. This wasn't over. And whoever her husband was, he wasn't going to stop until he found her. But he'd have to go through me first. For a long time, Isla didn't say anything. She just stared at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as they gripped the blanket. I could see the weight of her past pressing down on her. The fear, the exhaustion, the loneliness. I wasn't going to let her carry it alone anymore. I leaned forward. Isla, whatever you did to get away, it doesn't matter to me. You did what you had to do to protect yourself and Lily. That's all I need to know. Her eyes flickered to mine, searching for judgment, but I meant every word. She swallowed hard and nodded. I took money, she admitted. Not much, just enough to run. I knew if I left without it, we wouldn't survive. I thought I covered my tracks, but, she looked away. He has connections. And now he's hunting me. The word hunting sent a dark fury through me. What's his name? I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated. Isla, I need to know. She exhaled, as if saying his name would summon him from the shadows. Victor Calloway. The name sent a chill through me. Victor Calloway. The name wasn't just familiar, it was infamous. A businessman on the surface, but beneath that, he was something much worse. I had heard whispers over the years. Shady dealings, illegal activities, people who crossed him disappearing without a trace. And Isla had been married to him. A sick feeling settled in my gut. Does he know where you are? She shook her head. I don't think so. But if he finds out I'm with you. She didn't need to finish that sentence. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Then we'll make sure he doesn't. Her eyes snapped to mine. Damien, this isn't your fight. Yes, it is, I said firmly. It became my fight the moment I found you on that sidewalk. I'm not walking away, Isla. Not again. Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she exhaled shakily and nodded. Just then, a small voice broke the silence. Mommy. We both turned. Lily had woken up, her sleepy brown eyes blinking up at her mother. Isla instantly softened, pulling the little girl into her lap. I'm here, sweetheart. Lily yawned and looked at me for the first time, studying me with quiet curiosity. Who's that? Isla hesitated, as if unsure how to answer. I gave Lily a small smile. I'm Damien, a friend. Lily thought about this for a second, then nodded as if deciding I was safe. Okay. Then she turned to Isla. I'm hungry. I stood up. I'll make something. You don't have to, Isla started, but I waved her off. Let me take care of you for once, I said softly. She didn't argue this time. As I moved to the kitchen, my mind was already working. Victor Calloway wouldn't stop looking for Isla, but he had no idea who he was up against, and I was about to make sure he never found her again. As I moved through the kitchen, my hands worked on autopilot, cracking eggs, toasting bread, heating up some soup, but my mind was miles away. Victor Calloway. I had crossed paths with dangerous men before in business, but none like him. He wasn't just ruthless. He was the kind of man who didn't leave loose ends. And right now, Isla and Lily were loose ends he wanted to erase. I wasn't going to let that happen. I glanced over at the couch, where Isla held Lily close. Her expression was softer now as she whispered something to her daughter, but I could still see the exhaustion in her eyes. She was safe here, for now. But for how long? I placed the food on the table. It's not fancy, but it's warm. Lily perked up, her eyes lighting up at the sight of scrambled eggs and toast. She clambered off Isla's lap and hurried over, sitting eagerly at the table. Isla followed, slower, her movements careful. Thank you, she murmured. I shrugged. You don't have to thank me, Isla. She looked down at her plate. I do. You didn't have to do any of this. I wanted to tell her that I did have to. That the moment I saw her on that sidewalk, something in me needed to protect her. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed. I checked the screen. A message from my head of security. Unknown man asking questions about you. Wants to know where you live. No name given, but he looks serious. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Victor's men were already looking for me. I kept my expression neutral as I put my phone away, but Isla must have sensed my shift. What is it? Nothing, I lied. Just work. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way her eyes narrowed. But she didn't push. Lily happily ate her food, swinging her little legs under the table. Isla, however, barely touched hers. She was too tense. I wasn't going to let her live in fear any longer. We need a plan, I said quietly. She looked up. What do you mean? I mean, you can't keep running forever. You need to be free from him, Isla. You and Lily deserve to live without looking over your shoulder. A sad smile touched her lips. That's a beautiful idea, Damien. But Victor doesn't let people go. He owns them. Not anymore, I said firmly. She frowned. What are you? I have resources, Isla. People who can make sure Victor never finds you again. But first, I need to know everything. Every account in his name, every weakness, every dirty secret he's been keeping. Her hands trembled as she set down her fork. That's dangerous, Damien. So is leaving things the way they are. She bit her lip, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. You could get hurt. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. I'm not afraid of him. For a long moment, she just looked at me. And then, finally, she gave the smallest nod. I have a flash drive, she whispered, with evidence. I wasn't sure if I'd ever use it, but hope flickered in my chest. Where is it? Her expression darkened. Hidden. In a place I swore I'd never go back to. My jaw tightened. Where, Isla? She hesitated. Then, in a barely audible voice, she said, Our old house. Victor's estate. A dangerous place. A trap waiting to happen. But none of that mattered. Because if that flash drive was the key to setting Isla free, then I was going to get it. No matter what it took. The weight of Isla's words settled between us. Her flash drive, the key to ending Victor's hold on her, was inside his estate. A heavily guarded estate. Damien, it's too dangerous, she whispered. You can't just walk in there. I met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not just walking in. I'm getting in, getting what we need, and getting out. Fast. She shook her head. You don't understand. He has cameras everywhere, security at every entrance. If he catches you, he won't, I said, my voice firm. She sighed, pressing a hand to her forehead. I could tell she was torn, desperate for freedom, but terrified of what it would take to get it. I'll go with you, she said suddenly. No. The word left my mouth before I even thought about it. Absolutely not. She crossed her arms. It's my mess, Damien. And it's my plan. You and Lily are staying here, where it's safe. She wanted to argue. I could see it. But in the end, she sighed in defeat. Just be careful. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I promise. Then I stood, already making calls in my head. I had a job to do. The night air was thick with tension as I parked a few blocks away from Victor Calloway's estate. My security team had done their job well, hacked into the camera feeds, mapped out the guard patrols. I had a window, but it wasn't big. Slipping through the back fence, I kept low. The mansion loomed in the distance, its massive windows glowing with warm light. Somewhere inside, Victor was likely sipping his expensive whiskey, unaware that his world was about to crumble. I reached the side entrance Isla had described and picked the lock. My pulse remained steady, focused. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I moved through the shadows, following Isla's instructions to a hidden compartment in the study. I pulled back a panel in the bookshelf, revealing a small safe. The code. She had told me the code. Hands steady, I punched it in. The lock clicked open. And there it was, a sleek black flash drive. I exhaled, gripping it tightly. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. A slow, deliberate clap. Well, a voice drawled. I spun around. Victor Calloway stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 towering bodyguards. My stomach turned to ice. You have guts. I'll give you that, Victor mused, stepping closer. Breaking into my home? He chuckled. You must really care about Isla. I didn't respond. My mind raced through options. Victor smirked. Did you think I wouldn't find out where she went? That I wouldn't be watching? His eyes darkened. She belongs to me, Damien. And now, so do you. The bodyguard stepped forward. I tightened my grip on the flash drive. I wasn't going down without a fight. I moved first. With a quick step to the side, I grabbed a glass vase from the shelf and smashed it against the first guard's head. He staggered, giving me just enough time to dodge the second man's swing. Victor cursed. Get him, you idiots. The second guard lunged, but I was faster. A sharp elbow to his ribs, a strike to his knee, and he crumpled. Victor stepped back, eyes widening slightly. You think this changes anything? He sneered. I have power, Damien. I own people. I held up the flash drive. Not anymore. His expression darkened. That won't be enough. Oh, I think it will. With that, I turned and ran. I sprinted through the estate, adrenaline roaring in my veins. I could hear Victor shouting behind me, more guards closing in, but I was already gone. I scaled the fence, hit the ground running, and jumped into my car. Tires screeched as I sped away, my breath ragged. The flash drive burned hot in my palm. This was it. Victor Calloway's reign of terror was over. By morning, the entire world knew Victor Calloway's name for the wrong reasons. The evidence on the flash drive was overwhelming. Proof of money laundering, illegal dealings, and corruption at the highest levels. The news exploded. The FBI was already knocking on his door. And just like that, Isla was free. She watched the reports in stunned silence, Lily curled up in her lap. When she finally turned to me, tears brimmed in her eyes. It's over, she whispered. I nodded. It's over. She exhaled, a shaky, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. Then, before I could react, she threw her arms around me. Thank you, she breathed. For everything. I held her close. You never have to run again. She pulled back slightly, looking up at me. What now? I smiled, glancing at Lily, who was playing happily on the couch, unaware that her life had just changed forever. Now, I said, taking Isla's hand in mine, we start over. Together. And for the first time in a long, long time, Isla smiled.